Howdy, I'm Jammer. So, I was actually going to lead off with Fritz the Cat because I've kind of been wanting to do that lately, but then I thought I have been teasing over and over and over that I would eventually get around to talking about this book, Comics for Choice, Illustrated Abortion Stories, History, and Politics. I've done that in about 3 or 4 previous videos, and so I thought to myself, no. I keep saying I'm going to do this comic, and I intend to. So, that's what today's video is going to be about. We're going to be talking about Comics for Choice, a collection of individual stories, essays, poetry, reportings, what have you, about various abortion stories by about 99% women. I think there's one male contributor to this piece. Now, immediately, I recognize something that's going to happen. This is a pretty hot topic. And no, not the shitty retail location that used to be available in just about every mall where they sold Justin Bieber t-shirts alongside Tool t-shirts. Still not really figuring out how that one worked out, but whatever. The point is that abortion is a really hot button issue. It tends to be more of a red herring than anything else. It's designed far more often to distract people from the real issues in life, but abortion is a situation, abortion is a medical procedure, abortion is a public discussion topic that needs to be discussed. And I recognize, again, because it tends to be really wrapped up in emotion, because it gets wrapped up in religion, because it gets wrapped up in politics, this is going to be a pretty contested issue here. There's going to be a certain number of people who are already going to ask where my issue lies on this one. And I'm going to be honest and up front. I'm pro-choice. That's not going to change anytime soon. I'm a cisgender man. I don't have a uterus. I do not believe I have any moral authority to dictate what people who actually have uteruses are allowed to do or not do with them. So let me begin by noting, if you are not pro-choice, this video is not going to be for you. I'm sorry, I'm not targeting you. I'm just simply representing what I feel to be is a really interesting and important book. And yes, I'm letting my politics guide this a little bit. If that's not your thing, just stop the video, go watch some Lindsay Ellis or some Oliver North, because, you know, they're awesome. Also, Jeffree Star, if you haven't watched any of his videos, he's actually really funny, and just check him out, he's awesome. But, whatever the case, if you are not pro-choice, this video is not for you. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. We also need to address something right off the bat. One of my consistent criticisms of the conversation about abortion is that far too often the faces of the conversation tend to be men. And before I even continue, I'm aware right off the bat that is a severe amount of cognitive dissonance. I'm a man who hates it when men dominate the conversation about abortion. The only problem is I'm really the only person in my immediate social orbit who's read this book. I don't like it when men tend to dominate the conversation about pro-choice, predominantly because there seems to be often a kind of two-faced nature about it. Often the men in question tend to be cisgender, upper-class, or middle-class white men who tend to sort of turn it into an ego game. They try to turn themselves into the face of the abortion topic, whereas the voices and life experiences of women, particularly women of color, who often are some of the people who are most screwed in terms of abortion restrictions, don't get their voices heard. And so rather than defer to women who are actually in this matter, who care about this matter and want to tell their stories, you unfortunately have a situation where there's lots of white men dominating the conversation before they can even talk. I don't like that aspect. And I really don't like, air quote, pro-life men who also tend to dominate the conversation because, again, there seems to be, at least from my perception, a two-faced nature about it. Again, I'm not a man. I wasn't born with a uterus. I was born with a penis, and I identify with male. That's the way it's always been. Therefore, I don't feel I have the moral authority to tell somebody what they can or can't do, and hearing another man suggest that he has that moral authority has always bothered me tremendously because it feels condescending, presumptuous, and just really offensive to women who really struggle with whether or not to go out and get an abortion. So again, we're addressing the second point of this video, which is I'm a man who doesn't like it when men talk about abortion. I usually prefer to see women talk about this issue because, again, it's an issue that's going to impact their day-to-day reality far more than it is me. but I read the comic, and I don't know anybody else who did. So for the time being, I'm going to present this video not as me offering my own assessments about the issue of abortion, but instead bringing attention to the voices of various women who have had abortions or who have contributed to this book. So moving forward with this video, this is not me relaying my personal sentiments, opinions, philosophies, what have you about abortion. This is merely me pointing you towards this book and saying there are voices who have a lot to say about the topic of abortion. They're in this collection. And then finally, there's one last thing. This is the third point, and it's something that really needs to be addressed, which is, as of late, in our current political climate, there has been an argument that I've heard over and over and over again, not just in terms of YouTube, but in terms of real life as well, which is politics should not be present in comics. I'm sorry, but this is a stupid argument. And it is. The fact of the matter is, as I've argued over and over and over again, comics is a medium, it's an art form. And unfortunately, the people that I observe who argue that politics has no place to play in comics usually tends to equate to the sentence of, I don't want to see politics in my superhero comics. The same people who will say superhero comics are art, like all comics are art, will then immediately turn around and suggest politics has no place whatsoever in art. The problem is any student of the history of art or any human being anywhere will tell you that's just impossible. Bias is a fundamental reality to humanity. We are a species that is very, well, I don't like this word, but we tend to be very tribal in nature. We tend to pick sides, we have very strong beliefs, and one of the ways we express those beliefs and opinions is through our art. For some people, they typically try to express their politics in more subtler forms and try to let the story tell itself and maybe allow their political bias to come into the piece. Some artists throughout history have rejected this and used their platform as an artist to make a political statement. Keith Haring, for instance, is a really interesting example because a lot of his paintings, particularly the big Crack is Whack mural, and then some of his later artworks relating to the AIDS crisis were very political in nature. He used his art to make a political message. And an excellent example of this, and one that I hope to talk about in the future, is one of the most recent Green Lantern comic books on the market. Far Sector has a lot to do with the Black Lives Matter movement. It has a lot to say about the role of women of color in our society. It has a lot to suggest about individual citizens' rights. It has a lot of contemporary politics in it. And it's arguably right now one of the most popular, and I would argue one of the really good, solid comics that are being published today. But overall, I object to the notion that politics and art are mutually exclusive. They're not. Politics, as much as it can be annoying, as much as it can be emotionally exhausting, is still a fundamental facet of our day-to-day reality. It's part of our life. It's part of the core of who we are. I live in a predominantly conservative area, and I lean a little to the left. At one point I was a Democrat, but I've sort of dropped that for the most part. But I do acknowledge that my political beliefs tend to lean more towards the left. I can't let go of that bias, and trying to suggest that I have no politics whatsoever is ridiculous. Everybody has politics to some extent. And so, moving forward, again, what I want to really emphasize is that this video and this channel is built upon the premise that art, as a structure, as a mode of expression and communication, cannot be free of bias. Even the most escapist fantasy or science fiction, or even just the most escapist literature, period, to some extent is driven by a creator's bias, which may include their politics. This is a book of politics, and it's art. And if you want to continue to suggest that art and politics cannot exist simultaneously, you have that right, but I'm going to disagree with you till I'm blue in the face. Because again, it's art. It's the way we express ourselves, and occasionally we want to express ourselves politically. And so, with all of those caveats, let's move into why I think Comics for Choice is a really interesting collection, predominantly, first off, in terms of what it actually is about. Alright, so, all three of you who are still here and still watching, Thank you. I really appreciate it. Let's talk about what Comics for Choice is actually about. Well, as I noted before, Comics for Choice is a collection. What this is, it's a collection of essays, short stories, individual journal pieces, and interviews by, again, predominantly women. I believe there's one male contributor, and in fact, in the very back of the book, there's actually a listing of all the contributors to the piece, along with a small illustration of themselves, which is really cute, as well as what they've done over the course of their career. This collection is in fact, 100% pro-choice literature, meaning that every single woman in this book is contributing an abortion story, either their own, perhaps one of their family members. Oftentimes you'll find interviews between a daughter and their mother, or just reportage of the current state of abortion services in the United States of America. And I need to note that this book is largely situated around the United States. There are some stories that sort of branch off into other continents and nations, but for the most part, you're dealing with a United States point of view here. Now, again, this is a collection, and it's a very independent collection, which means this collection or these stories are not arranged sequentially in order to tell a larger story. Each little individual story is its own piece. Some of these stories are going to be 5 pages, 2 pages, or sometimes even a single page. If you take a look at this one, Do-It-Yourself Abortion, Horror Stories, Methods Women Have Used When Medical Abortion is Unavailable by Jennifer Camper, you'll note this is just one single page. And in fact, it's not even what we would refer to as a traditional story. It's really just a sort of series of what appear to be non sequiturs. But if you really look at it, it's all united by the fact that each one of the methods she shows here are ways by which women have, in the past, induced abortion. Whether it was beating the stomach with a baseball bat, squirting soap and turpentine into the uterus, inserting chili peppers into the vagina, ow, falling downstairs, drinking lye, what have you. These were actual methods that women in the past have employed in order to actually get an abortion. That's one style of story, and actually a pretty typical style as well. Another story here that I'm fond of is Jane by Rachel Wilson and Ali Shude. This is kind of an interview format by a group of women who, before Roe v. Wade actually was passed by the Supreme Court in the 1970s, effectively ran their own underground abortion clinic, where they would induce abortions. They basically ran their own day-to-day operations as an actual abortion clinic. They would offer women counseling services, and if you're thinking to yourself, that's kind of illegal, it was. Essentially, the story is about a group of women who saw no other options available in terms of helping women find access to abortions, and this is how they did it. This is actually, the tone of this story tends to be sort of first-person confessional narrative, so it's usually one of the women who ran the clinic sort of talking about their experiences, their motivations, why they actually delivered this service. And by the time Roe v. Wade actually comes down, they eventually disbanded the organization, but the sort of ending note of it is that despite the efforts made by various abortion protests and activists throughout this country, there's still cause for concern in terms of women like this seeing women's reproductive rights across the United States. Now, a later story that I'm actually really fond of, I'm not going to get into it here, is called Underwater. And what's really interesting about this story is it's a science fiction story. It's about these humanoid creatures which seem to be kind of like these human-shaped containers of salt water, and inside, I don't know if you can really see it, there's what appear to be vegetation. It's actually, in fact, coral. And what happens is there's a woman who, while she's in the bathtub, she observes that something has come out of her. She's not entirely sure what it is at first, but then she recognizes what it is. It's a kind of offspring. So basically the construction of the story is this woman has kind of a miscarriage, but it's also sort of hinted at that she aborted her own fetus. She then speaks with a friend asking her if she ever did it, and her friend shows her a tub filled with salt water where a coral collection has started, and you get the vibe that she has effectively kept her abortion and raised it in its own way. This is a really interesting story in the fact that it's not condemnatory. It's very much more about sort of understanding who you were, what are the choices that you make, touching on how a fetus can be a part of yourself, part of your being, part of your overall narrative, but at the same time trying to find a sort of catharsis for a perceived sense of guilt. Because as several of the stories point out, one of the tactics used against women who try to pursue abortion services or who have abortion services is a kind of cultural, often religiously inspired guilt. So what's interesting about this story is it shows a mode of existence, something entirely alien from us, but which sort of seems to have the same kind of process of abortion. So you can hopefully see, just from that story alone, there's a lot of really unique and interesting approaches to telling stories through comics. This story here, which is largely devoid of panels, is a young Latinx woman talking about getting pregnant, pursuing an abortion, and then confessing to her mom about it, who is actually extraordinarily supportive and helps her daughter through the entire process of the abortion. One of the interesting things about this collection is that there's a lot of intergenerational conversations, and I think one of the stories I marked, if I can find it, I really should have. Oh, of course I didn't mark it. Oh well. There's at least 2 or 3 stories in this collection which are told from the perspective of daughters discussing with their mothers either their mother's previous abortions. Oh, here's one. Let's see. So this story doesn't necessarily have, I can't find a title for it, but you can see right here, there's not a lot of play going on in terms of like panel layouts and stuff, but we'll get to form here in just a minute. But this is just a woman interviewing her mother who had actually had an abortion previously with her biological father. The young couple were dating, they were sleeping together, the mother got pregnant, and she pursued an abortion. Because at the time, she wasn't ready to be a mother, she didn't think that she wanted to have a child at that point, she wasn't sure, and so she thought an abortion would be just the best thing for her. It also gets into a little bit about how her husband at the time managed to sort of perceive and how he tried to be emotionally supportive, which is another interesting conversation into itself. But I think now at about 7 minutes, you get the general idea. This collection is not an overarching narrative. Again, it's a series of individual voices coming forward and talking. And that's what I think is really important about this collection, because far too often the story of abortion tends to be kind of this grand, sweeping, and often binary narrative. What do I mean by that? It's either purely good or purely bad. Comics for Choice does something really important by offering a whole host of voices. At about 281 pages, almost 300 pages of comics, this collection isn't just one person talking for or against abortion. We see here a whole nuance of perspectives about abortion, about how it impacts people's lives, about how it impacts people's relationships, their politics, their day-to-day realities, their emotions, their physical health. Abortion, like all things in life, is really complicated and nuanced, and everybody has their own experience with it. So, just in terms of the narrative approach, Comics for Choice is absolutely vital for the conversations we have about the procedure of abortion, about the ideas of abortion. Because instead of just trying to offer a narrative where it's definitively one thing or something else, Comics for Choice is an excellent reminder that we need to be listening to a lot of people's stories, because some of them, yes, are going to be bad, some of them are going to be wonderful, and some of them just are. And that's an aspect of the narrative that tends to get, well, deconstructed in the sort of hotbed political environment that tends to surround the conversation of abortion. And I really want to emphasize this again. What's important about this book is it offers voice and space for a lot of people who don't get their voices heard. They just want to tell their stories. And so what's really interesting about this book is it almost becomes a kind of oral history collection of women offering up their experiences with abortion and the way it impacted their life, for good, for ill, or just the way it impacted them, period. Narratively speaking, Comics for Choice is really interesting, and even if you don't believe in the practice of abortion, these stories are still interesting for the way it offers a glimpse into the way women viewed themselves, their bodies, their perceptions of their reproductive freedom, and the way they thought they were allowed or not allowed to live their day-to-day life. But now with all of that out of the way, let's talk about why Comics for Choice is interesting in the fact that it offers a lot of really interesting perspectives about the form of comics. Alright, so this video is actually already getting to be a little bit longer than I actually wanted it to, and also it's the heat of summer and I had turned off my AC, so I'm going to try to make this next part a little bit short and try to just pick around 3 examples to show you why I think Comics for Choice is interesting. The first thing about it is you have so many different people and cartoonists contributing to this collection. So you'll note the first example I showed you was, again, Do-It-Yourself Abortion Horror Stories by Jennifer Camper, which shows all the different ways by which women were able to achieve abortion or try to achieve an abortion in the past. You'll note the general structure of this comic is pretty basic, and I think that's really interesting because by its design, it's really trying to show you these physical objects that interacted with women's bodies in order to impact their pregnancy, specifically to terminate the fetus. Whether it's just a baseball bat, lye, chili peppers, falling down some stairs, what have you, she uses just these small physical items to really impact you and familiarize yourself with these items. You've probably seen or held a baseball bat at some point. You've probably seen, or God help you, accidentally touched your eyes or nose after holding a chili pepper. If you have, you know the pain I'm talking about. It's awful. Putting that thing in your vagina, I don't have a vagina, and I'm just like, ow. But what's really important here as well is the construction of the panel itself. It's just, again, a basic grid pattern, and it only uses black and white images. She keeps it really basic to really emphasize the fact that these were real things real women did to get an abortion on their own instead of going to a health clinic because they didn't have that choice or they didn't feel that they had that choice. So what's really interesting here is she's using the form of comics to create a real emotional and intellectual impact on the reader. She wants you to look at that coat hanger. She wants you to look at that lie and really see it. Not so much as a physical object, because again, these structures are very iconic in nature, but really more as concepts. A coat hanger is something I put my tweed blazers on, not something that I insert into my body in order to terminate a fetus. This is an image which has sort of followed and hounded pro-choicers forever, but at the same time, she's really using this image for a specific purpose. Now, another really interesting story in here is The Outcasts. It's a science fiction story, and I apologize, my camera is probably not going to be very good at capturing it, but what we see here is a small, short story about various women. They all tend to be predominantly women of color. I don't know if it's by their sort of head wraps, if it's supposed to be that they're Muslims, but whatever the case, this story is very much in the vein of The Handmaid's Tale. It's about a group of women who actively try to go out and pursue abortions and are eventually imprisoned in a kind of dystopic prison camp before eventually escaping and then finding their way to a secret network run and operated by women who go out and try to liberate women from this oppressive, patriarchal, dystopian government. It's really interesting, and I honestly enjoy it far more than The Handmaid's Tale. One, because it's short and it's able to do a lot more in just a couple pages, what The Handmaid's Tale took hundreds of pages to do. At the same time, I like The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. If you haven't read it, check it out. It's amazing. And the graphic novelization isn't bad either. I should talk about that one at some point. But anyway, whatever the case, this comic is really interesting to me for the way it differs so dramatically from the rest of the book. While a lot of times the rest of the book tends to be these kind of cartoony presentations of human beings with sort of kind of cartoony, can't talk, structures like those big bold lines there in the middle of the page, this one tends to rely a little bit more on kind of like photorealistic art. It's trying to create something very separate. You're not able to as easily imprint yourself on it, and the reason I think is predominantly because the author, in this case, let me make sure I give you the right one. Let's see, Outcast was written by Heidi Williamson and drawn by Julia Crace, or it could be Cross. My apologies if I mispronounced it. Speech impediment. I'm from the South. Just pick your reason. Whatever the case, this is non-iconic artwork, and I think they're doing it purposefully for the emphasis of making it a little bit difficult for the reader to imprint themselves on the character, but then also to consider, is the scenario I'm looking at really that far-fetched? Because again, abortion clinics get shut down because their hallways aren't wide enough. Is it really that surprising that we would exist in a science fiction universe where women would be imprisoned for getting an abortion? I don't know. I don't think so. Now here's another one, Self-Care After Your Abortion by Rachel Hayes. This is a very, at first glance, very basic comic book. In terms of its arrangement, most of the time you're looking at maybe 6 to 5 panels on a page. Sometimes there'll be a panel like this top one that'll cover the whole half the page. But for the most part, there's not a lot of dynamic action taking place. The character is usually illustrated in just a couple of lines, interacting with objects that themselves are just a few lines, and then most of the action is taking place in the word balloons. What this book is about is, if you read just a couple of pages, after your abortion, your body will experience change as it returns to its non-pregnant state. Cramps can be relieved by heat, ice, deep uterine massage in a downward motion from your belly button to your pubic bone. This helps pass clots. Light stretching can also help. She goes on to another page. It can be helpful to discuss these feelings. There are many free post-abortion counseling services as well as support groups and helplines all over the country. Reach out if you feel like you want to talk about your abortion, and if you don't know, that's okay too. This is a really short comic. It's not even a true story. In fact, really what just this is it's a combination of personal reflection in terms of the author's experience, but then also, importantly, it's just free advice to women who have gone out and gotten an abortion. And we really undervalue how important resources like this are. Again, an abortion is possibly one of the most traumatic experiences a woman can experience over the course of her life. And this is not simply just because of the tremendous amount of exterior cultural crap that she's going to have to deal with just in terms of getting the abortion. Abortion can have dramatic physical effects upon the body immediately afterwards, even if you just take the pill. Because as this book is very keen to remind you, most of the time abortions are not surgical procedures. In the early stages, it's literally just taking some pill, introducing some hormones that then basically cause the fetus at that point to detach itself from the uterine wall and to pass out the way women would pass menstrual blood. That's the reality of abortion. Nevertheless, those pills can have a dramatic effect upon a woman, and so a small comic like this can be reassuring and informative to somebody who's considering an abortion, or who has just recently had an abortion, or is in the process of getting one. Something like this, while it may not be dramatic in terms of its narrative approach, is still really important, simply from an educational standpoint. And then one last one, because I feel it's really important to talk about, is this one, 11 in Memoriam, People Murdered in America by So-Called Pro-Life Killers, words by Jennifer Camper, art by Katie Frickas. You'll see the comic is just this. It's panels with a name, and off to the side is a small description. So, if you look at this gentleman here, Dr. Barnett Slepian, April 23rd, 1946, October 23rd, 1928. A doctor who provided abortions was subjected to years of threats and harassment. Married and a father of 4, after attending synagogue, he was shot through his kitchen window at home in Amherst, New York. Every single face that you observe in this comic is someone who helped someone else get an abortion. It's a small story of their life, and then ultimately the way they were killed because of what they did. Ergo, trying to help people and trying to provide women with access to health care. This story just about broke me, and I'm going to be real with you, it's still hard to look at this page, because these are 11 human beings who had families, who were just living their lives and trying to do the best they could, and now they're gone because somebody thought it was okay to kill them. All right. So yes, In terms of the visual structure of Comics for Choice, there's so many options to pick from because you have so many different voices contributing to this collection. This is a dense collection. It took me a good solid 2 weeks to read through all of it because each artist is different. Some of these comics will take you all of 30 seconds to read, some of them will take you 10 minutes just because of how complicated they are. In terms of their arrangement of the form, in terms of their presentation, these are not just simple grid patterns with basic cartoony characters. Some of the artists put a lot of time and effort into the construction. So what's really interesting about Comics for Choice is that while the narrative approaches to this book is really beautiful, the form is also really important because you see so many different ways of arranging panels and telling stories visually as well as through the typical prose narrative. Comics for Choice is an important book, not just because of the stories it tells, but just because of the way it tells the stories. And so, if you love comics, I would definitely recommend you check this out, because so many of the cartoonists in this collection have really interesting approaches towards composition, towards panel arrangement, towards presentation of the characters, what have you. There's so much to glean artistically from this book. And so, if it has been made apparent already, hopefully, as I do my final summation, you'll understand why I love this book so much. Alright, wow, this video took way longer than it was supposed to. I'm sorry, I keep saying these things are going to be short, and then I just keep talking and talking and talking. So let's make this final wrap up just nice and short. If I haven't made it apparent already, I love this collection. I'm so glad that I bought it. I'm so glad that I read it. I'm so glad that I finally... My chair is clicking all the damn time. I'm so glad that I finally sat down and talked about it. Because again, yes, I'm pro-choice. My politics are heavily influencing my decision to read, to own, and to review this book for the channel. And again, if you don't like that I did it, you have as much right to call me out. Now, you're not going to, because I'm going to make sure I turn comments off in this section. I would really just prefer to avoid people just saying all sorts of nasty things to each other. If you don't like what I have to say, then, I don't know, give me a 1-star review on Google or something like that. But even if you're not pro-choice, if you appreciate the medium of comics, you can appreciate the fact that Comics for Choice is a really interesting opportunity to reflect on a medium that far too often has been sort of sold off as something base and commercial, something designed solely for children. There are stories in this book that are really hard to read because they are often stories of trauma, stories of fear, stories of reservation from women who sometimes feel like they don't deserve to live after what they've done, either because of their own internal self-loathing or because of cultural forces outside of them. Like I said at the start, abortion is a really difficult concept. It's a really difficult conversation to have. There's so much politics, there's so much religion, there's so much morality, there's just so much to it. And so what's really nice about this book is that, yes, while you have a whole host of people arguing politically and morally for the right of women to get an abortion, what's really beautiful about this book to me is it's an opportunity to just listen to people. It's an opportunity to just listen to a group of women who believe strongly in their rights, who believe strongly in their rights to reproductive freedom. This collection is an excellent opportunity to see a group of women artists contributing their voices. And again, if you're a cisgender man like me, it's an opportunity to sort of get out of your frame of mind and just listen to someone else's experience and question your own standing in society, to question your own privileges, and to question whether or not you have inadvertently contributed to a system where women feel so much fear and paranoia and anxiety. It's an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity for conversation. It's an opportunity to just listen to some amazing voices and read some truly amazing comics. So, with that, I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for your time. I tremendously appreciate it. If you are interested in Comics for Choice, this one might be a little more tricky to actually reach out to. Let's see, the publisher of this one, I didn't actually take the time to put it out. Printed in the United States, Comics for Choice, edited by Book Design. It's put out by Crix, DLF, and Logioso. Oh, no. Oh, Hazel. Well, Hazel Nulevant. I really should have done this before the video. You know what? If you're interested in this comic, go to your local comic book shop, see if they've got a copy of it. If they don't, try your local public library because they might have a copy of it. If not, they can probably get it to you through interlibrary loan. And if you can't get it through there, just go to Google, go to the shopping center, and type in Comics for Choice. It may pop up there. But check your local comic book shop and library first because they're there to help you out. And thank you again for probably what now amounts to about 40 minutes of me talking about what is arguably one of the most passion-inducing political topics in this country, if not this world. Thank you so much for watching and, at the very least, not completely hating me and despising me. Please like, share, and subscribe. It helps me know that you're watching these videos, that you like them, and I know I've turned off the comment section in this video, but in future videos, if there's a comic that you'd like me to read or talk about, by all means, leave a comment. Tell me what books you're reading. Tell me what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy. Just talk to me about comics because, if it hasn't been made apparent already, I love comics and I love talking about them. So in conclusion, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Go read some comics.